Our next chapter is about evolution. We ended last chapter with mutations, and we talked about how mutations are a source of evolution. So we are going to get to that starting this week. But how do you think life came to be on this planet? Anybody have any specific ideas? Because of apes? Okay. You might have to be
They have water.
Because of water, yeah. Water was necessary for life, yep. Oxygen was also necessary for life, yes. Anybody else? The thousands of cultures and religions all over the world all have their own ideas over the past whatever thousands of years that humans have been alive. God made humans, okay. So that is a Christianity thing. Sometimes other religions also, evolution, okay. Like I said, thousands of cultures and thousands of religions all have their different creation stories. Whichever one you are a part of is totally up to you, but this is science class, so we are going to stick to science. And that is what we're going to learn about. An asteroid crashed into Earth while it was forming, carrying water, thus giving planet and ocean. Since we have a habitable zone, life flourished. That is very specific, Giovanni. Very good. All right. What do you guys think is happening in this picture? What are those? Phones are evolving how? How are they evolving? What's happening to them? Or what has happened to them over time? Getting smaller. They've been updating. So even though they've been getting smaller, they've still been updating and getting more advanced. Good. Newer technology. As technology advances, phones have gotten smaller. All right, the next few slides you don't have, but we're just going to talk about them. They're nothing you need to write down. We don't need to write down anything until the essential question and key concept. But the next slide is video games, the evolution of video games. What's happening here? Or what has happened to video games over the past 30, 40, 50 years? Video game graphics. How are they upgrading? How are they being upgraded? Be specific. How are they evolving, Christopher? What's happening? Or what has happened to them? They look 3D. They got more realistic, more like a cartoon, better graphics. Good. What about the size? The size of the characters. Size has gotten larger. Yep. Good. So video games have evolved over the years. This one's always fun, the evolution of the audio player. Again, this is not something you need to write down. It's something we're talking about. Back in the 1800s, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to have a phonograph. And they were quite expensive. So only rich people had these. Then came along the record player in the 1920s. Until the 1960s through 80s, people listened to music on an 8-track player. So these aren't similar in structure, but they're similar in function. They perform the same function, playing music. In the 1980s came cassette tapes. I remember cassette tapes, I had them. I'm that old. In the 90s, we had CDs. And today, we listen to music on our phones, which are fancy iPods. They play MP3 files. You had one of the CD ones? Okay, good. All right, so we can also apply this concept to animals. We look at older animals and compare them to newer ones. So on the left is a skeleton of an imperial elephant, which is now extinct. It was found at the La Brea Tar Pits in California and is on display at the Los Angeles Museum. Some schools go to field trips out at the Los Angeles Museum and the La Brea Tar Pits, and they get to see this big old fossil of an imperial elephant. And then on the right, that's a modern elephant. What differences do you guys see between the two? Yep, that's the obvious one, the imperial elephant's tusks are longer and more curvy. Anything else that you guys can see? One is taller, yeah. Pictures are kind of hard to tell, but the imperial elephants were definitely taller. Good. All right, what about horses? The horse's ancestor, 55 million years ago, used to look like that, the one on the left. And then the modern horse is on the right. What differences do you guys see? There's one obvious one and a few less obvious. The neck is smaller than the first. The front legs are shorter in the older horse. It looks like a dinosaur before. Good. Yep. So this is what scientists have been doing. Different head structure, yeah. The modern horse has a really big jaw. Really big jawbone, mandible. But this is what scientists have been doing since Darwin. They've studied animals, studied old animals versus new animals. What are the similarities? What are the differences? So that is what we're going to start with, is how evolution started. Who started questioning things? So who contributed ideas to the biological theory of evolution? There's one main scientist that everybody's heard of, but we are in 10.1, we're going to talk about the guys that came before him. And then 10.2, we're going to talk about him. But there were many scientists that contributed to the theory of evolution, not just Charles Darwin. Carolus Linnaeus was one. He was a Swedish botanist, naturalist, physician, and zoologist. So he was from Sweden. Botany is the study of plants. Zoology is the study of animals. So he studied both plants and animals. A naturalist means he studied nature. And physician means he was an actual doctor. He developed a new system of organization for plants, animals, and minerals based on their similarities. And back in the mid 18th century, the physical similarities was all you could see. So he basically took all plants and said, here, these are all plants. And then here, these are all animals. Then you have all the swimming animals and all the animals that walk on four legs. So he looked at things and categorized them according to what they look like. Today we call this classification and taxonomy. And we group organisms not only by their structural similarities, what they look like wings and arms, etc., but also their similarities in DNA. We now have the structure of DNA. We know what it is. We compare DNA among different animals and plants. And that's what we base our classification on. We'll talk about Alfred Russel Wallace as well. Interestingly, the side note, you don't have to write down the side note. It's just a side note. But Linnaeus's work on the classification of man forms one of the 18th century roots of modern scientific racism. So Linnaeus also classified man into different categories, and not very well. But a lot of researchers, especially in the 1900s, based their work on his classifications. Now we know a lot of it's not true, but back then they did not. There's more information if you're into that sort of thing and you want to read about it. There's a website there. George Buffon was from the late 18th century. He was French. He was one of the first that said living things do change through time. He said this was somehow a result of influences from the environment or even chance. So at the time, people believed that animals and plants were just plopped down on the earth, fully formed. He was the first person that said, no, that was not the case. And he said this was somehow a result of influences from the environment or chance. He didn't know about environmental pressures. He didn't know about things like mutations, but he still said it. He believed the Earth must be at least 75,000 years old. It's actually 4 to 5 billion years old, but at the time, people only thought it was 6,000 years old. He was one of the first to suggest that humans and apes are related. He believed that species could change over generations, although he publicly rejected the idea. And one of his most significant contributions to the biological sciences was his insistence that natural phenomena must be explained by natural laws rather than theological doctrine. And theological doctrine is a fancy word for religion. Natural laws have to describe nature. It should not be religion's job. Erasmus Darwin was actually Charles Darwin's grandfather. He was an English doctor and poet. He was one of the first to publicly suggest the Earth and life on it must have been evolving for millions of ages before the commencement of the history of mankind. That was a very bold statement for his time, and obviously inspired his grandson in many ways to publish his work. And Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, he was French and he studied nature. He was the first evolutionist who confidently and very publicly stated his ideas, although some of them turned out to be wrong. But he believed that evolution was mostly due to the inheritance of acquired characteristics as creatures adapted to their environments. And the main word that is wrong in that sentence is acquired. When you dye your hair blue, that is an acquired trait. That is not something that you're going to pass on to your children. Evolution is all about inherited traits, traits that are in your DNA that you got from your parents, that you will pass on to your offspring.